we just had an absolute bombshell story on NIL funding that dropped yesterday. It says Ohio State believes it needs $13 million in NIL money to keep its football roster together. Wow. So there is a lot of stuff that has to do with NIL. Ryan Day publicly coming out, saying figures, referencing $2 million per top quarterback, $1 million per edge rusher, and Ohio State publicly stating they need $13 million just to keep their current roster together. We're not even talking about recruiting. And what this tells me, there's some poachers in college football. The poachers that poached Jordan Addison from Pittsburgh, the poachers that poached Tyler Harrell from Louisville. The poachers are boosters, and these boosters are what I believe to, be tampering with players, top talented players on other rosters. And you look at Ohio State, they're one of two or three of the top most talented rosters in college football. Their 2021 class was one of the best in recruiting history. You don't think that boosters from other schools are contacting these kids from 2021? The kids that missed out on the quote-unquote NIL money, when in reality, you should get on campus and then get the money. The kids in 2021 missed out on the whole Texas A&M way of doing business, where they just give kids NIL deals if they come to the school. There are boosters, which I call poachers, from other schools who are contacting high-level talented players at Ohio State, at Pittsburgh, at any of these Big Ten schools, mainly from the SEC, and they're telling these kids, a team like USC goes to Jordan Addison and they say, you're how much money are you making? What's your NIL deal? We can double it, we can triple it, and that is the major issue. Ohio State, Ryan Day coming out and saying, listen, we got to get $13 million just to keep our freaking roster together. This has nothing to even do with recruiting, but Day gets into recruiting. He puts out figures. This is a crazy, groundbreaking NIL story. I'm going to go through some of this and react to it. Speaking to about 100 members of the Columbus business community on Thursday morning, Ohio State coach Ryan Day put a name, image, and likeness price tag on what he believes it will take to keep the Ohio State football roster together. The rate, $13 million. To some schools engaged in NIL payments at the highest level right now, that number might sound small. To many schools in the Big Ten, it may sound gigantic and impossible. As usual, it's a number that puts Ohio State in the thick of the latest changes to college football. As the Buckeyes always say, they seek to straddle the line of keeping up without going too far. So this is where it gets really complicated, and I've explained this multiple times in my past video about how Ohio State operates when it comes to NIL. They want it to be an on-campus entity. The reason you're committing to Ohio State is not because you're getting a $3 million NIL deal. You come to Ohio State for the development, for the coaching, and there are NIL opportunities when you come on campus and you throw, for 45 touchdowns like C.J. Stroud, and you run for 1,700 yards your true freshman year like Trevion Henderson, you will get NIL opportunities. But Ohio State, this is a very tricky situation, because what I believe is happening right now, especially when it comes to Ohio State's 2021 recruiting class, which was one of the best in recruiting history. It was actually, I believe, the second best in recruiting history until Texas A&M's artificial class last year, where they blatantly cheated. So it's an absurdly talented class, and I think there are poachers, aka boosters from other programs, talking to these kids, or maybe they're not even talking to them. Maybe these kids are seeing what other 2021 prospects are getting in terms of NIL payments. The kids might not even be playing yet, but because they're top recruits in 2021 and we project them to be future stars, they are being offered this money, and Ohio State's trying to straddle the line. They're saying, listen, we will lose our recruiting classes if we do not pay these kids. They'll go somewhere else. The article goes on to say, and while it might be tempting to look at $13 million for an 85-man scholarship football team as $150K per player, I think the better calculation is something closer to $500,000 for each of the 26 guys you can't live without. So I even think it's a more exclusive list than that. There's probably about 15 players on Ohio State that should get around $1 million right now. I think Ohio State is looking, if you can use your NLI to get money, that's fine. But Ohio State, when it comes to the upper echelon talented guys, the JTTs, the Jacks, well, I don't think Jack Sawyer would transfer. He's from Ohio. But like the Emeka Ibukas, Julian Fleming. Julian Fleming is such an interesting case where he's really not getting a ton of playing time. I'm sure there's huge, massive tampering going on where there are other schools offering him a lot of money and saying, listen, you're barely playing. Ohio State's receiver room is so crowded. This is a former number 1 overall receiver from the class of 2020, top 3 player in the country. He's probably getting offers. And this is just a crazy situation. Ohio State was hosting an NIL ambassador program to encourage businesses to hire Ohio State athletes through the athletic department. Businesses get the athletes as endorsers and can provide internship and educational opportunities. And of course, the athletes get paid. But the event was also a clear sign that Ohio State is making the moves it believes it needs to keep up with the unregulated NIL world, where the NCAA is sitting on the sidelines as states and athletic departments implement different rules and hand out millions of dollars in different ways to keep players on their teams. So yeah, very complicated. I've discussed this multiple times. We'd be here for 50 minutes we'd be here for 3 hours if I tried to explain every dynamic when it comes to NIL. But the main point, you have a rule system in place that's not being enforced at all. So it's putting these universities in very, tough situations. When you're Ohio State and you see Texas A&M blatantly cheating, and you see Florida, I don't know if Florida, but you see these other programs blatantly cheating, it's like, do we blatantly cheat too? Should we do that? Should we offer kids money to come here? Now you're dealing with kids that are already on your roster, possibly getting poached, like Jordan Addison. And I think the Jordan Addison situation was so bad, I legitimately believe Jordan Addison was not going to transfer until a USC booster came to him and said, listen, come play with Caleb Williams, come play in California. There's way better NIL opportunities. You're going to make 3 or 4 times the amount you would make with an NIL deal with the University of Pittsburgh. I don't even think Jordan Addison was thinking about transferring until a USC booster got in his ear. That's how bad this stuff is getting. The article also says Ohio State's trying to, it's a crazy balance you're trying to play as a program. Do we go balls to the wall with this NIL? What do we do? Because, you're possibly talking about your players getting poached. And then it also says, but the reality is that Ohio State can't fall behind. Smith and Day said they believe NIL and the transfer portal will sort itself out in the next 2 to 3 years. Yeesh. I've said it multiple times. The NCAA, listen, 2022 happens, whatever. 2022 gave the NCAA a great opportunity to set an example and bowl ban Texas A&M. It would discourage boosters from blatantly skirting the rules and paying kids under the table to attend schools. It would clean up the NIL. We want the NIL to be an on-campus entity. We want the kids to be choosing schools based on development, based on relationships, and everyone knew that Texas A&M was the program that they weren't the only program, but they went so crazy. It's like you have such a softball, just bowl ban them. But the NCAA is not doing anything, and now 2 or 3 years, the 2023 recruiting cycle looks like it's going to be a complete mess now. That's what I get from this. It's going to be a complete mess. This was a great quote from Ryan Day. He says, if the speed limit's 45 miles per hour and you drive 45 miles per hour, a lot of people are going to pass you. And if you go too fast, you're going to get pulled over. Well, maybe not. If the speed limit was 45 miles an hour last year, Texas A&M was going 150. They didn't get pulled over. That's the problem. That is the issue right now with the NCAA. But Ryan Day is basically saying, listen, if you go on a street and it's, the speed limit's 35, nobody goes 35. We all go 42. We all go 43. And there's kind of an unspoken rule among cops that you're not going to get pulled over for going 7 or 8 over the speed limit. So it's like you have to, at least when it comes to players on your roster, even if they have not earned it on the field, it's like we cannot let our own players get poached by other programs, boosters that are going to be offering these kids. Ohio State is the one team in the Big Ten that genuinely has a roster that can compete with Alabama, that can compete with Georgia. That's how talented the 2021 class, the 2020 Ohio State. It's constant top 5 classes, I'm emphasizing the 2021 class because it was so good. But this is crazy. And then Ryan Day is talking about figures here. Day said the Buckeyes have been gathering information by talking to recruits and their families and getting a sense of what other schools might be discussing with NIL deals. He said he believes right now top shelf quarterbacks require $2 million in NIL money. Major offensive tackles and edge rushers, he said, are about $1 million. That's a very interesting figure, $2 million. I wonder if he means $2 million per year. Because if you guys remember, the current 5-star 2023 quarterback from the state of California that committed to Tennessee, he got an $8 million NIL deal spread out over multiple years. So it was around $2 million per year. And Ryan Day is saying he's just estimating, maybe around $2 million per year when you're talking about the top tier quarterbacks, and then $1 million for the edge rushers and things like that. So it is crazy. Ryan Day is publicly coming out, and then it says, to deal with it, Day set the bar at $13 million. That would include money offered to players by the outside collectives that have already formed to pay Ohio State players, and it would include this new brand ambassador program as outlined in the 10-page blah, 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 blah. So Ryan Day and Ohio State and probably Gene Smith, they got together and they calculated that $13 million is what it's going to take to keep the current roster together. And that's a very important, way they're saying it. Keep the roster together. They're not talking about we need $13 million because we got to offer Noah Rogers, who's a really good receiver in the 2023 class, money. We got to offer Carnell Tate money. We got to offer, these are all, recruits. These are all kids that have not committed anywhere. They're not talking about that. What I think Ohio State is talking about, they're concerned their players might get poached by other programs like what happened to Jordan Addison. And I'm sure Ohio State should have no problem raising this money. But it is crazy that Ryan Day is coming out and publicly stating we need $13 million. He's being as transparent as possible. He's saying, listen, top tier quarterbacks are making $2 million. And then people say, well, how is Ohio State able to land someone like Dylan Raiola if they're not paying kids directly? Dylan Raiola's father was a former NFL player. The kid doesn't need money. That's a unique situation with Dylan Raiola. And a lot of these kids, especially the quarterbacks, they're not so much focused on the current NIL deal as they are of going to a place where they're going to be developed the best. And, you can argue who the best quarterback guru is right now in college football, Ryan Day or Lincoln Riley. But with Ryan Day, you're talking about a top 15 first round pick in Dwayne Haskins. You're talking about the 11th overall pick in Justin Fields. You're talking about a top 3 overall pick in CJ Stroud when the 2023 draft happens. So I'm just saying a lot of those guys value the quarterbacks, the top tier quarterbacks. They do value development. And Dylan Raiola is a unique situation. Ohio State, I think he's going to end up being the number 1 overall player. But this is some groundbreaking stuff. Next thing I wanted to discuss, I've talked about this a little bit in a past video a few days ago. The SEC-only playoff plan is a bluff, probably. So yes, this idea that the SEC will have an SEC-only playoff it's a threat to the overall state of college football, basically demanding that we must go to an expanded playoff format, which I think is a certain when the contract expires, the TV contracts expire after 2025, we will be going to a 12-team playoff. So the SEC, they're getting 2 more teams. There's going to be a crazy schedule imbalance. Oklahoma and Texas are 2 really storied programs. They both recruit at a top 10 level nationally. Now you're talking about like 7 of the top 10 overall, programs that recruit are going to be SEC programs once Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC. So the SEC is basically saying you cannot keep it at a 4-team playoff. It is such an unfair advantage for the SEC because we're going to have so much tougher schedules with all of these great teams. You have to expand the playoff. You have to give two lost teams a chance to get into the playoff, and that's what I believe they're going to do. And then we got some great news here. College football playoff. The chairman wants an expanded college football playoff plan by May of 2023. Absolutely great news. He says, quote, "My hope is no later this time a year from now. We have everything in place," he told 247 Sports at the SEC spring meetings in Florida. May of 2023 is what I'm shooting for at the absolute latest. And they're supposed to be revisiting the 12-team playoff model that was presented to the group. They ended up striking it down. That was a horrible decision, but hopefully, in part due to because it's the best way to go forward is to expand the playoffs and give more teams the chance, and it will actually create a more exciting regular season for more teams because more teams are going to have a chance to make the playoff rather than just the Oklahomas, the Ohio States, the Alabamas, the Georgias, teams like that. There's going to be more teams with a chance. And then, of course, they say, well, the playoff semifinal games are already blowouts. If you expand it, it's just going to get worse. No, you can't project like that. I think if you expanded the playoffs and gave the first 4 teams byes and made it 5v12 matchup on campus, 6v11, 7v10, 8v9, you would have upsets, and you get on-campus games, you get more revenue for the, overall programs, you get more TV money because there's more important games, and the most important thing with expanding the playoffs, guys, if you remember, you will not have the kids sitting out the New Year's Six games like we saw with Kenny Pickett. Did Kenneth Walker also sit out? I forget if Kenneth Walker did or not, but Kenny Pickett, sitting out a New Year's Six bowl. Denzel Ward sat out a New Year's Six bowl back against USC. So we want these more games to matter so kids will be playing in them. We don't want the best players sitting out frickin' New Year's Six bowls. That is ridiculous. And the way to do that is to expand the playoff to make all the New Year's Six bowls meaningful and matter when it comes to the national championship overall. So that is why the playoff is going to get expanded. But guys, overall today, or this was yesterday, it broke, and I'm talking about it now. An absolute groundbreaking story where Ryan Day comes out and says, listen, basically says our players, they're getting, there's a lot of tampering going on. Other programs, they're trying to poach our players. We need to raise, he puts a literal number on it, $13 million, fully transparent, and he says we got to raise this money to make sure none of our players who we currently have end up transferring, because we know now with the transfer portal, this is another huge reason why we need transfer portal windows, by the way. You're talking about two-week windows, 1 2-week window right at the end of the regular season, and then 1 2-week window, right around June, where kids are able to enter the transfer portal. This idea, when kids are able to enter the transfer portal at any time, it will only promote tampering. I'm not saying, the 2-week transfer portal window is a perfect fix to tampering, but it will help with it a little bit. It'll also help coaches be able to manage their rosters a lot easier. So the faster we can implement a college football transfer portal window, again, the proposal is 2 2-week windows, 1 2-week window at the end of the regular season, and then another 2-week window sometime in the middle of the offseason. Those are the only times kids would be permitted to enter the transfer portal, in those 2 2-week windows. That's the proposal that needs to happen, and I just cannot believe Ryan Day said, listen, we need $13 million. I'm going to tell you right now, top-tier quarterbacks, we're talking to these recruits, they're getting $2 million. Edge rushers are getting $1 million, and I actually think Ryan Day is being very conservative with those numbers. He doesn't want to overshoot it and look stupid I'm sure he's probably heard of quarterbacks, $3 or $4 million. They're getting $8 million deals. You know, Dante Moore is another one who's a 5-star quarterback that's probably going to be getting some money. There's a rumor that Arch Manning was offered, who's the number 1 overall player, was offered $15 million by the University of Texas. I think Arch Manning is going to Texas. He doesn't need the money, you know, do it with his bloodlines and with where his family is positioned. But that was another rumor. So the NIL is completely off the rails at this point, and Ryan Day with such a great quote saying, listen, if the speed limit's 35, we cannot drive at 35. Nobody drives at 35. So do we go to 42 or do we go to 150 miles per hour like Texas A&M, like Miami will be in 2023 with their collectives? You know, you see things about Oregon. You see things with Tennessee. That's very public. The Carnell Tate recruitment is a very interesting one to follow here as Ohio State looks like they're going to land him in this month. But guys, it is a crazy world of college football, and that is one of the craziest stories I've seen regarding NIL. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.